2 weeks ago I ordered the first Huel and it actually arrived a few days later. So now here is the experience I have so far, and maybe also for you what you could experience potentially. So now, first of all, in the package are this thing here, which is a shaker. And about the shaker, I have to say that it shakes very nice. It has a very nice weight distribution, which means it has a very nice feel to it. You can actually hold it down here with one hand, and if there is a little bit of air in here, then you can actually hold it very conveniently. It also shakes very well. Because the powder of Huel is very fine, this leads to a very good and smooth result. Many people have noted online, and also Huel online states that mixing the Huel the night before you actually drink it and then you put it into the fridge increases the taste of Huel actually. And this is something I can also confirm. So far, I have ordered 2 bags. These were kind of my trial bags. They cost me 63 euros with the usual discount. Now, I ordered flavored editions. The first one was black edition, and of course both are black edition because they're also black, as you can see. The first one was vanilla, and the second one was cookie. The second one was cookie and cream. Now, I tried them, and I also tried them on video for the first time. The main problem with these flavored ones is they taste very artificially sweet. And I barely couldn't get them down, basically. If I even mixed it 1 scoop of Huel with a liter of water, it just tasted very artificially sweet, and I didn't like the taste at all. So now, what I realized is that this is probably largely because I am at this point in time used to a very good and also low carb diet, which means I am kind of low in sugars, and this means that I taste sweetness. I have probably a higher sensitivity to sweetness, at least if I compare myself to periods where I ate more and more sweet foods, where I had a much higher threshold for something to taste sweet. So these days, for example, if I make onions, they taste very sweet to me. If I fry onions in the pan, and then if you add these things into my diet, then they taste very, very artificially sweet. It's not the normal sugary sweet that tastes kind of nice, but it's kind of a more artificial sweetness. And that's already one of the main downsides. The second main downside is digestion. So what I try to do is I try to mix Huel powder, 1 portion of Huel powder in terms of weight, with 1 portion of any nutty fat. This means now, Huel actually recommends for a low carb or ketogenic Huel to have desiccated coconut, and to get it at a store, at the grocery store, which is where you usually get these things, and you can also get desiccated coconut in a grocery store, which is also something that's noteworthy, I think. And now the idea was, in order to skew the macronutrients in here, because there are actually 17 grams of carbohydrates in 100 grams of Huel, and 1 scoop of Huel black has 45 grams, which equates to 200 calories. 1 scoop of normal Huel has 50 grams, which equates to 200 calories. If you then take 2 scoops, and then you result in 400 calories. Now, I wanted to have a system that was very, very simple, because it needed to, I think if things are unnecessarily complicated, or if you can also make things way simpler, then it is way easier for you to adhere to a schedule or to the plan. And for me, this, I think, in terms of food, is very important, because it's basically for everybody very important. Food is such an essential part of everyone's life, at least the nutritious side of it, that it is, I think, very important to try to get it as right as possible, because then you benefit from the benefits, basically, from the health benefits. You live longer, you feel fresher, you are more focused, you're maybe more energetic, and things like this. So now, what I try to do is I try to get desiccated coconut in the store, and then mix it in, as recommended by Huel themselves, with 1-to-1 with Huel powder. The problem was, the taste didn't go away even if I mixed it with 1-to-1. Now, we have to discuss at this point a major downside to mixing Huel with something. Huel is made for a consumption of 2,000 calories a day, even though they don't really recommend it to be your whole meal replacement. But that's kind of what I'm trying to do. At least what I'm trying to do is to make it the default meal. And of course this is only a trial period, and if after a month I realize this is not good and I am not motivated at all anymore, or if something else has, or if I discover some other major downsides, then I probably will switch to my normal diet again. But among the many benefits, so the sentence actually this way makes more sense. But it's just a huge benefit, and I think it's worth at least trying this benefit. And this benefit is time. If you had 1 more hour a day, what would you actually do? If you then had 7 more hours a week, that's basically an additional work day, if you consider 8 hours a week. Now, if you can get rid of cooking, of groceries, of doing the groceries, not shopping groceries, of preparing your food and cooking, and not mixing the food, but eating the food, and then also doing the dishes afterwards. This is just a very large chunk of your time, which is actually just chore. It's just a chore. It's a daily work you have to do. You cannot really outsource. At least you cannot really outsource without other large costs. So what I looked at in the past were meal delivery services. The problem is just they have a minimum order requirement of usually 10 euros. So 10 euros, even on an OMA diet where you only eat once a day, is something that is, I think, just not very cost effective. If I can also get something that is a little bit cheaper, so maybe 5 to 10 euros a day. And now so basically meal deliveries are one thing. Another thing would be to use something like a Mensa or a cafeteria, or to just go to a restaurant every now and then, or basically every day. One of the main principles or policies for big changes like these is that it has to work every single day. It has to basically, I see the day as the default unit, which many people also do, and I want to design everything to work in a given day. So in order for Huel to replace my standard diet and to be the thing that works every single day, the downside now is that if you mix Huel 2,000 calories, let's say you consume 2,000 calories of Huel for simplicity's sake, and then you mix it with something else. The problem is the minerals on here and also the vitamins are not made for this proportion. So therefore you only get half of the recommended daily portions, which is a huge downside. You can combat this downside by using something like multivitamins and by trying to supplement your nutrition maybe with something else. But this creates kind of a problem. I nevertheless chose Huel because it's one of the biggest companies. And one of the biggest companies is not necessarily a criterion that is in itself something that's very beneficial, but it is beneficial if you consider the different parts how you interact with a company like this. The customer service, for example, is quite good, I would say. Then things like the Huel shaker just feel finished. They feel ready. They feel like somebody had actually spent some time thinking about this. They actually look quite nice, even though I don't like the big logo on it, because I try to live a more or less logo-less life. And I try to actually scrape it off, also with I tried to heat it up actually already, and it didn't work quite well. And since I'm in portrait mode, it didn't really focus, but it's not that important, I guess. Let's switch back the exposure to a more normal exposure. So what also is very nice is the fact that the bags are designed very nice. Of course, these bags are plastic, they are trash, and this is also one of the major downsides with meal delivery, just the trash of it. And the same is true for buying a yogurt at the grocery store. It's just a problem, and it's a problem that hasn't been solved yet. Of course, sometimes there are, or some companies already are experimenting with plastic that is actually made from resources that actually are then degradable. And I am not getting the exposure right again. It seems that way. But this, of course, is a downside. These plastic bags. But if I compare it to my normal diet, then it's actually probably less trash than my normal diet. I occasionally buy yogurt at the store, and usually you get yogurt in these plastic things, and these are large things, and it's a large amount of plastic. Even the salad usually is wrapped in plastic, and the same is true for sometimes getting other things. What I tried to do in the past to buy from the grocery store, basically without, or to just reduce the amount of plastic trash I produced over time. So now switching to Huel, the only thing I would have are these bags. And with the current approach of having basically about one bag a week, I try to also maybe do one normal. That's just the thinking. It's not a complete plan yet, but what I thought is maybe trying to do 1 day a week where I eat normally and the rest kind of at least trying to do it with Huel and seeing what the results are actually, or what the results actually are. So now, in terms of digestion, if I add the desiccated coconut to the Huel, I had digestive issues, let's just say, and I didn't really know whether it was from the Huel or from the desiccated coconut, but what I can say is that I had slight issues with desiccated coconut before. Another downside to the desiccated coconut way of making this low carb is that desiccated coconut is desiccated. This means it is actually not granular enough. It's not small enough, and therefore it's not powdery, but it's much more a little bit. Of course, it gives it a little bit structure, but the problem is, if you want this to be fully drinkable, then you cannot really have a big structure in it. And it also, of course, if you then want to actually wash this shaker, then you might have a problem. So now, how much Huel did I consume? I had these 2 bags, 1.53 kilograms, and also here 1.53 kilograms. And this one is, I would say there are like 400 grams or 500 grams left in here. And from the vanilla, I didn't consume that much, maybe half of it. And I try to gradually introduce Huel into my diet and to not fully replace it yet. This is also what is recommended. I actually already have an order, basically it's arriving tomorrow, for 4 bags of Huel. And the attempt is to, instead of trying desiccated coconut alone, what I would instead try is 1 bag a week of these, and then in the weight proportion of 1:1, combine it with any kind of nuts, which also gives me a little bit leeway if I want to play with the taste in the future. And because now the next bags are unflavored, I can actually play a little bit with the nut taste. Another problem, a little bit of a problem, is if you mix it with desiccated coconut alone, then the desiccated coconut part doesn't have that much protein. So now, even though this is a protein, very high in protein powder, not powder, but a meal replacement, which is actually, so it has 19 grams of fat, 17 grams of carbohydrate, and protein is 43 grams. But now if I mix it in the weight ratio of 1:1 with desiccated coconut, because desiccated coconut is mostly fat, I don't have a lot of protein. So this would equate to 80 to 90 grams of protein a day, and I weigh anywhere from 75 to 80 kilograms. So therefore it's a little bit low on the protein side. There are also, I'm not completely sure on this, but there seems to be some evidence that consuming large amounts of protein doesn't really benefit your longevity or positively influence your longevity, but rather harm it kind of. Therefore, it's kind of a balancing act in between trying to get as much protein as needed for sport and for recovering from activity, and kind of reducing it in order to increase longevity. And the same is true for fasting. So what I'm kind of trying to do is not only to replace my diet with Huel, but what I'm simultaneously trying to do is to match it as close as possible to my previous structure. My previous structure was ideally, as an ideal day, is I would eat 2 hours a day. I still call it 1 meal a day because I realized 23:1, so 23 hours of fasting and 1 hour of eating, is not very beneficial, because in the beginning you are not that hungry, sometimes you are hungry, and then so usually I find that I usually eat in the evening dinner, and I start at 8 p.m. and then I eat till 10 p.m. I experimented a lot with different phases and how long to fast and how long not to fast, but if you want to do one meal a day, and also this is what kind of sources like Thomas de Lauer say, it doesn't make sense to only have 1 hour, but to actually expand the window a little bit more, because then the body actually can get the nutrients a little bit better. What I often experience if I fast for a long period of time and then I consume something again, then I actually also have digestive problems. And if I enlarge the time window a bit to 2 hours, for example, or to 3 or 4 hours, then this becomes less of a problem. So now, what else is there to say, I think? That was rather a question that was kind of targeted towards me. What else is there to say about the shakers? So now, how much Huel and how much nuts would you have to consume every single day? And this is where kind of the simple approach, or the simplifying approach again, comes in. You can get 3 different kinds of nuts already smashed, basically, or mixed, or basically in a powdery form at the grocery store. At least at the grocery store I visit. And these are desiccated coconut, even though it's not really powdery. So you first would have to grind it. And that's kind of a problem, because I want it to be as simple as possible and not have to wash also my smoothie mixer. The second one is hazelnut, and the third one is almond. In terms of price, the desiccated coconut is about half the price of these other two. These other two sell for 200 grams at around €1.50. And the same is true for hazelnut, so basically both. And the desiccated coconut sells for around 80 cents, also depending on the store. So now, if I switch to the better nuts, I also have them completely grinded, therefore I will probably taste hazelnut and almond. Now, when it comes to how much now in a given day, I had this idea, what if I could somehow skew this whole thing into 1 bag of nuts a day, and then however many scoops of Huel I did, or I took in order to make the meal, or I ate, depending on how you actually describe this whole thing. And what I realized is that there is actually a very easy solution. If you take 200 grams of mixed nuts, let's just say, I had mixed nuts before in my normal diet, and therefore... Now, discussing the shaker. If I want to consume 2000 calories a day, and I also want to have the best Huel experience, then I would have to prepare them the night before. The problem is now, this is meant for 2 scoops of Huel, 500 milliliters of water, and the rest is basically air or space in there for shaking it properly. Now, if I want to add 200 grams of smashed nuts into this, what I have to do is I have to fill it up to 1 liter in order to kind of reach the same consistency. We have actually not 200 grams, but only 100 grams, because it's 2 scoops of Huel and then 100 grams of nuts, which equates to 190 grams in total powder volume, and the rest is basically water. I think it makes the most sense to first put in the Huel and then mix it. Of course, you also put in first the water, because this makes the whole thing less sticky to the walls of the shaker. And then you add the nuts, and then you try to mix it again, maybe up to here, fill it up to here, and then try to mix it again, and then add the rest of the water. The shaker is actually quite nice, and I also think it's kind of spill-proof, at least more spill-proof compared to a normal water bottle you would get. It is currently filled up with cookies and cream combined with mixed nuts, which I also still had, and I just mixed. I cannot open it now, so basically you would open it now, and then you would not open it now, but here, and then you would add the 2 scoops of Huel. And then you could shake it, so you can open it up kind of here. That's what I'm trying to say. I also looked at other options for shakers. So I want to ideally have a shaker that is black and also intransparent, which means you can't see through it, because then nobody knows you're actually eating, but everybody thinks you're drinking. I think there is quite something to the myth of you working 24/7 all day long. Of course, this is not true, but I think this idea, there is something about this idea that excites me, about trying to get rid of all the processes in my life that actually just repeat itself again and again and again, take time, and maybe
there is a more optimal solution, like maybe replacing your diet with Huel. Now, and therefore taking away the time necessary every single day. For the rest of your life, if you only eat once a day, even if somebody makes dinner, you still have the time of eating. And this is just, I mean, it's just a thing. If you love eating, of course, it's nice. But you also probably love to do other things, like watching movies all day long. And it's probably not the best. And therefore, if you remove as many of these, this is kind of the thinking behind this. There are a lot of different activities. Each of these activities release a certain amount of dopamine. Some of them less, some of them more. Now, the more dopamine releasing an activity is, the more we seek it, because dopamine is the reward system of the body that rewards us by making us feel good about the anticipation of a reward usually. And now, what happens if you have very high releasing dopamine spiking activities, basically, like junk food, like watching movies where there are sounds, where maybe there is faster speed, where there are things you would not usually see if you just walked around in nature, then this basically releases dopamine. And for the rest of the time, then everything else kind of seems, compared to this dopamine releasing activity, this high dopamine releasing activity, to be less rewardful, you could say. And therefore, by removing something, like eating, you might actually enjoy the other things more, like working, like studying, like doing an activity with friends, like all the other things in life that then seem maybe not as dull anymore, and therefore life in general could just be more fun. Now back to the shaker. The shaker, this is one, and this is 1,000 calories. How is the calculation, or what is the calculation behind this? 2 scoops of Huel, 400 calories. Now if you add a mixed bag of nuts, which is often kind of a mixed bag actually, then you have 600 calories on top, actually 614 with the nuts I used, which equates to actually almost exactly 1,000 calories. And that's again very, very simple. These calories, or this shaker, is 1,000 calories. This is basically half of my meal for a day. And now if I want to eat 2,000 calories, I just have a second shaker. And therefore I also probably need a second shaker. The shaker from Huel itself is €12 if you buy another one from Huel. The main problems I have with this shaker specifically is the big logo, and also the fact that it's not entirely black. And maybe I would like something that is a little bit more standardized and kind of more symmetric. So I looked on Amazon and I saw a few different shakers. Most of them were kind of transparent, which is not the kind of thing I am trying to do. But I also didn't want to buy another branded Huel shaker yet. I probably will buy another shaker. So with these other shakers, what I found out is, first of all, they look like protein shakers you usually find the Fitness Pro with. But the problem is that I don't really like the look of it. I want these things to be universal water bottles, but simultaneously also shakers. So ideally, you would have these 2 bottles, and then you would just carry a little bit of Huel powder, and then these would be your water bottles, but simultaneously, again, this would also be basically your plate where you eat out of. And it's a very nice idea. And now, if I want to set this idea into practice, I looked at, for 1, shakers on Amazon, and for 2, also water bottles on Amazon. I think what you can do with water bottles is you can just get one of these shaker balls, which are basically balls made out of metal that you can just put into a bottle, and many of these water bottles actually open up here. So also you can take a scoop of Huel powder and just put it in, because the problem if you have a water bottle that only opens up this far is this here, that you might not get the Huel in actually. So therefore I looked at a few water bottles, and there are actually some that look quite nice. And then if you have a shaker ball, you maybe could use them universally as water bottles, and with the shaker ball it actually would then dissolve all these different things. I still would assume that a company like Huel spent some time thinking of a product like this in the product design, therefore this is probably still the better experience, but the other one would be a more universal experience. And also, these 2 bottles are quite large. If I then would move again, or if I would travel, I obviously would would have to take these with me. And I don't want to carry like 2 water bottles and then my other usual water bottles and then these 2 Huel bottles and then in addition maybe a whole cooking machine for the kitchen. What I'm trying to say is I try to keep things as compact as possible and as light as possible in order to be able to move again to maybe another city or also to maybe travel for quite some time or for a longer period of time. So therefore I took a look at the shakers and I don't know yet what I will get into, but for trying things out I will still, I use the shaker. This is actually free. The scoops also are free. There is actually 1 scoop with every order that is free, and I think it makes sense to keep the scoops in the bags because then you don't have to clean them, because if you put them out of the bag there might be some small insects that actually eat the rest of the Huel, or you additionally have to wash it, but then of course it's a little bit wet and you cannot put it in there. So therefore I just had 2 scoops basically, and both are in these 2 bags, and I just left them in there. Of course they are a little bit powdery, and yeah, well, other people on YouTube said that after quite some time everything began to dissolve, so basically the whole home began to dissolve in Huel powder, kind of. There was like a Huel dust on the notebooks and things like these. Even though I have my kitchen basically in the same room, it's kind of a corner in this apartment, the studio apartment, I haven't noticed this. I mean, I'm quite careful with what I put in here, and that's pretty much it. You open the bag and then you close the bag again. Another big thing I am kind of conscious about is, or I'm kind of maybe critical about, is the fact, so some people have also noted that these bags don't completely seal again. So these are just normal resealable bags and they do reseal quite well, but the problem is if there is a slight gap in there, then this is basically a chunk. If you wanted to create a food that was very, very ideal for moths to consume and to thrive on, then it would be this food. A giant pack of things stacked with calories and with nutrients. And since I did have problems with moths in the past, I actually don't know if they are actually called this. I just look it up right now. Yes, they are, so I was kind of right. There are 2 different kinds of moths, and the first one are the moths that eat clothes, or rather the small rests of your body, of the organic rests of your body that are still on your clothes. And the second one are moths that are actually just eat normal food. Now, they get into all kinds of things. I even had them once basically enter sealed bags like this, plastic bags, and this is just a problem you don't really want to deal with. But I think in every big city, at least the cities I have lived in, there are just moths out there. So therefore this is something to also keep in mind. Well, I think this sums up my experience with Huel so far. What I also think I might do is, so previously I kind of had a eat at home policy. This means I ate my food at home usually. Why? Because this is just a constraint that makes sure many other requirements are hit by just using this very simple constraint. You don't usually go out to restaurants because you eat at home. You also just buy groceries at the grocery store because you cannot eat at random other restaurants or cafes or things like these. So therefore I found this to be quite useful. I might break this nevertheless, because in the last days especially I found that if I go to a library in the evening to do kind of managerial work, so kind of life management work, like answering emails and things like these, and finances and things like these, I try to do in the evening. And now if I go to the library and I still want to have my normal 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. eating schedule, I actually would have, since the library is open till 10, I would have to take the Huel with me. Usually libraries don't allow to consume any food in there, usually only water, but since nobody knows, because it's intransparent, I think this is kind of this might just be a benefit. Or I just go outside whenever I consume Huel. Or I consume Huel. It sounds ridiculous, but I mean, you don't really eat, you just drink, and that's the whole idea. There are a few downsides to this whole scenario. One of these is that it actually is not as cheap as you would think. So it's kind of a very cheap bag. This bag, if you just consume this bag alone, would last you for about 3 days. And that's not very much. And this bag is usually depending on discounts and depending on how much you order, it's anywhere from 28 euros to 35 euros, about this range. And that's quite much for a bag that is basically similar, at least in terms of consistency, to something like wheat flour you would also get. Wheat flour is maybe €1 for a kilogram, and this is 1.5 kilogram, and it's 30 times, about 30 times the price. So I mean, it's actually ridiculous. Of course, this calculation works because people usually have a budget for groceries. And if they then see the groceries budget, which for me is anywhere ranging from 150 to 250 euros, probably averaging at a little bit more than 150, slightly below 200, then what this gives you is a cost comparison that is very similar, even though it could probably be a lot more cheap or a lot cheaper. But compared to other companies, actually, this is much more on the cheaper side, which is also one of the reasons I opted for this, because I didn't want to end this whole thing due to cost-related reasons, due to me saying, okay, this is very expensive, it's probably not the best healthy way to live. Why is it not the best healthy way to live? Because there are literally almost no experience with people eating this only, basically. There are no scientific studies where people take Huel for 5 years and then you compare them to their sibling, which happens to be a twin, who didn't do the whole thing. And there are also so many other environmental factors you have to consider when actually trying to observe the dietary impact or the impact a dietary change has actually. So this makes the whole thing very complicated. And apart from a few other downsides of something like this, like there seems to be some evidence these days that just getting many of your nutrients from plants means you basically have a little bit of a compromise in terms of bioavailability. So bioavailability is the concept of how much of a given unit of macronutrient, so proteins and carbohydrates and fats, so the 3 different ones, and also the other ones, so basically the micronutrients, minerals and vitamins, how much of these you can actually convert into body own nutrients and use basically. And in terms of animal products, there seems to be a slightly higher bioavailability. Also, if you mix different foods together, for example eggs and potatoes, then you actually get, in terms of protein, for example, a higher bioavailability of protein, actually more than 100, compared to the protein that is actually just measured and in these foods. So to sum it up, I think it was a kind of a rocky introduction into this whole topic. I hope that it will kind of help me to just have more time in a given day, if I have 1 hour more. And this, I would hope this would only take 10 minutes of preparation. And also, so I basically would have 2 shakers, either from Huel or from another source, and then I would drink them in the evening, and then afterwards I would wash them out and fill them up again. That's the whole process. And since I have these 200-gram bags, which very conveniently happen to be portioned in 1 bag a day, which is very convenient